This month is 40 years actually since the Mossad uprisings, and we wanted to talk about and understand the lessons from our own history and some of our victories and what we can take from those lessons moving forward into the struggle. So I'm going to hand over to Shirin.
Thanks, Naila. So as Naila said, this month is 40 years since both the Toxteth and then the Mossad uprisings. These were uprisings which spread all across England in response to police brutality. So they started in St Paul's in Bristol, they moved on to Brixton, and then to Toxteth actually today, 40 years ago, and yesterday. And then because the police sent all of their police in Manchester to Liverpool, 2 days later, Mossad exploded in an uprising. And that was really the last of this kind of sequence of uprisings in England. And as you can imagine, there was widespread kind of alarm and panic from the establishment. Like the much hated James Anderton, who was chief constable of Great Manchester Police at the time, he talked about these rioters as displaying anarchy and lunacy. And the Thatcher government also, they talked about this being a criminal act. But I wanted to talk a bit about some of what was going on. Because really these acts weren't meaningless, they weren't criminal, they were a response to deep police racism, unemployment and inequalities. And it was about young people fighting against injustice. They were black and white. So in Mossad, on the highest point of the riots, the second night of the uprisings, black and white people, 1,000 black and white young people surrounded Mossad police station, calling for justice. And for a short period of time, this was a window when young people really turned the tables on the racist police. It gave hope to a generation, really, that things could change, and they did change in response to these uprisings. People hopefully will talk about their experiences, but the government panicked and they threw huge amounts of money suddenly into the youth centres and community places that they'd said they didn't have money in before, because they were so scared of what young people were organising around. And people didn't forget these experiences. Alex Wheatle, who's a colleague of mine at Manchester Met, he was a young person at the time, and people might have seen the amazing documentary films, Small Axe, which feature Alex Wheatle. And he remembers his experience of the Brixton uprisings. He says, on that night, we were in control and they were not. Now, I wasn't alive at the time, and I'm hoping people can talk about kind of their memories, but I wanted to quickly show 3 photographs from the Manchester Evening News to give a bit of a sense of what was going on. And Manchester Evening News reports were really talked about these people being criminals, very violent people. But the photos, even though they're desperate to show this image of criminality, the photos also show something else going on. So I'm going to try and share my screen. And I just make that bigger. So I'm going to just talk about 3 photos from the Manchester Evening News or during the riots that they show in their newspaper. So can you all see that photo first? Yeah. Yeah. Great, good. So this is the photo from the second night of the uprisings in Mossad. And the caption is really trying to do a lot of work in telling us what we can see. You can all read close encounters of a dangerous kind. But the caption doesn't really seem to match what we can see in this photograph. So what can we see? We can see a mixed crowd of young people, black and white people. And that's in real contrast to the police, who are completely a white kind of gang, really. The young people that we can see, some of them are smiling. There's a girl fiddling with her kind of cuff. There's a boy smoking a cigarette. Another's looking at the camera a bit bemused. And if you crop out the police, this might almost be an image of a music festival, some kind of festival, really. And actually, an observer from the Mossad Defence Committee, which was set up to defend young people after these uprisings, noted that on the second day of the riots, and this is what we're seeing here, the atmosphere was like a carnival, really. It was people taking back control of their streets and of their area. And you can kind of see this kind of confidence of the unorganised nature of the night, that confidence in strength of numbers. they're outdoors in their own area, and it really contrasts to the kind of really kind of violent nature of the police that you see there. And if you think about which side you might want to be on in this, behind the police lines where the photographer, or could you more easily imagine being on the side of the crowd? The second photo is really the only photograph you see of which Manchester Evening News shows of police violence. But again, they're doing huge work here in the captions to try and tell us who's at fault. And of course, it's the young people at fault, apparently, in this photograph. So you can have a quick read of that caption, just showing really how much the media kind of has to work on kind of really trying to get you to blame the young boy who's on the floor. So even though there's this hugely long caption, we don't know why the young person is on the ground. He's obviously injured. We're sure that the young people are to blame. They're the ones throwing rocks and missiles. But in this image, there's clearly only one violent and armed presence in the photograph. That's the police officer that you can see. And on the last day of these uprisings in Moss Side, the police took their revenge with shocking violence on the crowd. And this was really what the uprisings have been about, the kind of attacks on young people day in, day out in Moss Side. People might know the Bodie Centre in Fallowfield, a GP practice, was named after Dr. Bodie, who was a local doctor in Fallowfield. And he treated many of the injured young people who were attacked by the police, who were too scared to go to hospital because they were scared that the police would take them from hospital. And Dr. Bodie treated many of these injured young people. He testified to treating broken ribs from these riots, and even dreadlocks, which were ripped from a young person's head by the police. And this image gives just one kind of tiny moment of that sense of
30 seconds, Shirin.
Oh shit. Okay, so quickly I'll go on to the third photo, which shows the kind of police standing up in their kind of open top vans, and protecting, kind of zooming in. It almost gives a sense of kind of occupation, and they're actually using the tactics from Northern Ireland here, the police, in these open top vans for the first time in English history. A participant from the riot said it felt like parts of Belfast, occupied territory. And I'll skip over, but that kind of, you get a sense again of the crowd, of how kind of relaxed they are, unorganized, and the police as a kind of organized gang really in this period. And I wanted to show these photos really just to give a sense of kind of those people who fought up, and who rose up and fought back against the injustices in their lives. They show black and white people uniting, and we stand in that tradition of resisting against racism, against police racism, and against the injustices that are shaping people's lives.
You need to wind up, Shirin.
Okay, so I'll end there, but I'll just to say that people learn. CLR James, who was the kind of amazing black Marxist, he said people learn history best when they are making history, and we see that in Black Lives Matter, where people kind of question the history they've been taught, and we saw that in these uprisings from Moss Side and Toxteth. And so hopefully this conference can kind of stand on the tradition of these giants of kind of rising up against the injustice in our lives. So sorry I went on a bit.
Thank you so much for that, Shirin.